At the heart of the village, a door creaked open. Karim stepped out, his breath a ghost in the cold air, his eyes darting across the empty courtyard. He told himself it was just the wind. Just the silence playing tricks. But deep inside, he knew better. She was here. He had heard her name slip through the marketplace in hushed voices. He had seen the way the women pressed their lips tight when he passed, their eyes dark with something that was not quite pity. The ground beneath him felt unsteady, as if the very earth was shifting beneath his feet. It had begun. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. And then, a voice, soft as the night breeze, sharp as a blade against his skin. Karim. He froze. The hairs on his arms rose like whispers of a forgotten warning. He knew that voice. He had silenced that voice. Or so he thought. Zainab was the daughter of a respected merchant, a woman whose laughter once rang like the sound of chimes in the Harmattan breeze. But her fate had taken a cruel turn when she married Malam Karim, a man whose name commanded respect, whose wealth turned heads, and whose cruelty was hidden behind a carefully woven mask. Their union had been celebrated with feasts that lasted for days, the sound of drums reverberating through the town as people praised Zainab for securing such a powerful husband. "You are lucky," they told her. "Karim will provide for you." But no one had warned her that a man could provide gold with one hand and steal a woman's soul with the other. The first night after their wedding, the walls of their home bore witness to her first scream, a sharp cry muffled by the darkness, a slap that landed with a force she never saw coming. She had knocked over a wooden cup while serving him water, and before she could even form an apology, his palm had struck her cheek. "A wife must be careful," he hissed, his eyes dark with warning. She had stood there, stunned, the sting on her face burning deeper than the shame settling in her bones. The next morning, she went to her mother, expecting comfort, expecting someone to tell her this was wrong. But her mother's face was heavy with silence, her voice thick with resignation. "Men have their ways," she whispered. "A good wife learns patience." And so, Zainab learned. She learned to walk softly, to hold her breath when she heard his footsteps, to silence the voice inside her that wanted to scream every time his hand curled into a fist. The bruises became part of her, hidden beneath layers of fabric, behind false smiles. The town of Dambara saw the golden bracelets on her wrist but never the blackened skin beneath them. Karim was a master of deception. To the world, he was a devoted husband, a man who spoke with wisdom, who donated generously to the mosque, who stood first in line during prayers. But behind closed doors, he was a storm, a force of destruction that left Zainab broken and breathless. He beat her for mistakes she never made, for the anger he carried within himself, for the power it gave him to see fear in her eyes. And each night, as she lay cowed on the cold floor of their house, she wondered if this was how her life would end, trapped in a cycle of pain, waiting for the day he would strike too hard, too deep. But the night that changed everything was unlike the others. It began with a mistake, like always. She had forgotten to heat his meal before he arrived home, and his rage erupted like fire catching dry grass. The first slap sent her reeling, the second made her vision blur, and when she hit the ground, he didn't stop. Kicks landed against her ribs, his voice a distant echo in her ringing ears. The pain was unbearable, but something inside her, something buried deep beneath years of suffering, began to rise. As she lay there, barely able to breathe, she thought of her mother's voice, of the woman who whispered in corners but never acted, of the word that told her this was normal. And in that moment, something in her broke, not her bones, not her spirit, but the invisible chains that had held her in place for too long. That night, as Karim slept, his breathing heavy with the exhaustion of his cruelty, Zainab moved. Every inch of her body protested, but she forced herself up. The room was dark, but she knew its every corner. With slow, Silent steps, she reached the door, unlatched it, and stepped outside. The cold air hit her like a slap, but this one did not hurt, it awakened her. She did not look back as she walked, her feet moving faster with each breath. The town was asleep, unaware that one of its daughters was slipping away, leaving behind a path soaked in pain. But as she stepped onto the path that led beyond the village, something stirred in the shadows. A presence, unseen yet unmistakable. He was being watched. She turned, expecting to see Karim, expecting to hear the voice that had haunted her nights. But there was nothing, just the wind through the trees, the distant howl of a lone jackal. And then, as she took another step, the world around her shifted, as if the land itself had swallowed her whole. The next morning, when the people of Dombora awoke, they found Karim standing in the center of the village, his face contorted with fury. "She is gone," he bellowed, his voice shaking with something that resembled fear more than anger. The villagers whispered among themselves. Where could she have gone? A woman does not simply disappear. A search party was sent out, torches flickering as they combed the land, calling her name. But Zainab was nowhere to be found. The footprints in the dust led only so far before vanishing, as if the wind had erased her very existence. And for the first time in his life, Karim felt something he could not control, something he could not beat into submission. He felt the cold grip of dread. Please don't forget to subscribe to Ubuntu Folktales for more exciting videos. Hit the subscriber button below, share and drop a comment in the comment section. Thank you so much. The town of Dombora had seen many misfortunes in its time, failed harvests that left stomachs empty, sudden illnesses that claimed the strong and the weak alike, whispers of spirits that moved through the night like unseen shadows. But never had it seen something quite like this, the disappearance of Zainab, the merchant's daughter, the wife of Malam Karim. Women whispered behind their scarves, their voices hushed yet trembling with something between curiosity and fear. Men spoke of duty, of order, of a wife's place, yet even they could not deny the strangeness of the event. How could a woman simply vanish into thin air? Where had she gone? And, more importantly, who or what had taken her? But the one who felt the weight of this mystery the most was Karim himself. At first, his rage had been unrelenting, a fire that roared through his veins as he stormed through the village, demanding answers no one could give. He searched every alley, knocked on every door, threatened the women who dared whisper too loudly, and even summoned the elders to sit in council over the matter. But the truth was cruel in its simplicity. Zainab was gone. The paths leading out of the village bore no trace of her footsteps beyond a certain point, as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. It was unnatural, unsettling, impossible. As the days passed, Karim's anger began to wither, curling in on itself like burnt paper, replaced by something he did not dare name, dread. It started with the silence. Their house, once filled with his booming commands, the scraping of clay bowls against wooden tables, and Zainab's quiet movements as she obeyed his every demand, had become unnervingly still. At night, the silence was even heavier, pressing against his chest like an unseen weight. He told himself it was simply the absence of another presence, the emptiness of a house no longer shared. But deep inside, he knew better. Something was wrong. The first time he heard the whisper, it was just as he was drifting to sleep. It was faint, like a breath of wind slipping through the cracks in the walls. Karim. His eyes snapped open. The room was dark, save for the flickering light of the lantern that burned low beside his bed. His heart pounded against his ribs as he sat up, scanning the room, the shadows stretching like long fingers against the walls. No one was there. He told himself it had been his imagination, a remnant of a dream slipping through the haze of sleep. But then it happened again. And again. Each night, as he lay in the darkness, he would hear it, soft, insidious, just on the edge of sound. Karim. He tried to ignore it. He tried to silence it with palm wine, with distractions, with the company of others. But no matter how much he tried to drown it out, it always returned, whispering his name like a secret carried by the wind. Then came the knocking. At first, it was subtle, a faint tapping against the wooden door of his hut, slow, deliberate, almost playful. Tap. 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 He would rise from his bed, his pulse a frantic drumbeat in his ears, and fling open the door, only to be met with emptiness, the dark, yawning silence of the village asleep. But as the nights passed, the knocking grew louder, more urgent, rattling the door in its frame, making the walls tremble. When he finally yelled into the night, demanding to know who was there, the only answer he received was laughter. Soft. Mocking. Familiar. Zainab. The whispers followed him beyond his home. In the market, as he bartered for goods, he would hear it drifting between the voices of traders. Karim. In the mosque, as he knelt in prayer, the sacred silence was punctured by the sound of someone breathing right behind him. He spun around, only to find nothing but the flickering glow of the lanterns. The villagers noticed his change. He was no longer the proud, untouchable man they had feared. His once bold steps had become hesitant. His once commanding voice carried the waver of a man haunted. His once fearsome eyes now darted at every shadow, as if expecting something, or someone, to lunge from the darkness. But it was not just whispers and laughter anymore. Other things began to happen. His food rotted before he could eat it, turning black and putrid overnight. His cattle grew weak, their eyes glassy, their bodies wasting away as if drained by an unseen force. The very air inside his home became thick, heavy, suffocating, laced with the scent of wet earth and something else, something rotten. He burned incense, sought the counsel of spiritual men, paid offerings to the ancestors. But nothing stopped it. Nothing silenced her. Then, one night, something changed. The whispers stopped. The laughter faded. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing but silence. He should have felt relief. But instead, he felt terror. Because silence did not mean peace. Silence meant something was about to happen. The air in the room grew heavy, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. The lantern beside his bed flickered, the flame shrinking as if struggling to breathe. Then, slowly, deliberately, the door creaked open. Karim's breath caught in his throat. The night was in black beyond the doorway, but the shape standing just beyond it was darker. A figure. Tall. Motionless. Watching. Who's there? His voice came out in a whisper, hoarse and trembling. No answer. The figure took a step forward, into the dim glow of the lantern. The light caught her face, and Karim's world shattered. It was Zainab. But not as he had last seen her. Not the woman he had broken, beaten, silenced. No, this Zainab was different. Her skin glowed under the lantern light, her eyes dark, unblinking. There were no bruises on her face, no fear in her expression. She stood tall, her presence filling the room with something Karim could not name but felt deep in his bones. Power. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands trembled. Zainab, he croaked. She smiled. It was not the smile of the woman who had once served him in quiet obedience. It was the smile of someone who knew something he did not. Someone who had returned for something he could not give. Someone who was no longer bound by fear, or pain, or the rules of the world as he understood them. She took another step forward. Karim stumbled back. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the mat, his breath ragged. You're not real, he whispered, shaking his head violently, as if he could will her away. You disappeared. No one knew where you went. You can't be here. You're not. Zainab tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, she spoke. And when she did, her voice was not a whisper, not a laugh. It was something colder, something finer. I never left, Karim. The lantern's flame died. And in the suffocating darkness, Karim screamed. The sun rose over Dombara, casting long, golden rays across the land, but in Maulam Karim's world, light no longer brought comfort. The village moved around him as it always had, women grinding millet at dawn, traders lifting their voices in the market, children chasing each other through the dust, but Karim was no longer part of that rhythm. He was slipping away. The whispers had spread. People saw the hollow look in his eyes, the way he flinched at shadows that weren't there, the way his once mighty presence had shrunk into something pitiful. They did not ask him what was wrong, not because they did not wonder, but because they already knew. The elders spoke of it in hushed voices over calabashes of millet beer. The women murmured about it as they pounded yam. The children made a game of it, daring each other to step onto his doorstep and whisper, "Zainab has returned." But no one stayed long near his house. Karim barely ate. His once strong hands trembled as he lifted his food, only to drop it when he smelled the rot that had begun to seep into everything he touched. Even the water in his calabash had turned dark, thick, as if the very essence of decay had seeped into his world. But the worst part, the thing that was breaking him, was that he was never alone. She was there. Not always in sight. No. That would have been easier. Instead, she existed in glimpses, in movements just at the edge of his vision. A shadow where there should have been none. A breath of wind inside a closed room. A reflection in the water that did not match his own. It started small. The scent of wet earth. Not the clean scent of rain-soaked soil, but the deep, musky, graveyard scent of something that had been buried and unearthed. He would wake to it clinging to his clothes, his bed, his very skin. Then, her laughter. At first, it came as a whisper, woven into the wind, slipping through the gaps in the wooden walls of his home. But as the nights stretched into something unbearable, it grew louder, more familiar, more mocking. The same laugh that once belonged to the woman who had smiled at him before she became his wife. The woman he had broken. The woman he thought was gone. And then, the shadows began to move. One night, as Karim sat by his dying fire, gripping a charm an old soothsayer had given him, he saw her. Not just in the corner of his eye, not just a trick of the light, he saw her. She stood at the doorway, her face barely illuminated by the flickering flame. And she smiled. Not the trembling, submissive smile of the wife he had ruled over. No, this smile was different. It was knowing. It was sharp. It was full of something he had never seen in her before. Power. Karim's breath itched in his throat. His body froze, his mind screaming that this was impossible. Zainab, he choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. She did not move. Did not blink. The fire crackled, casting jagged shadows on the walls, but her own shadow did not move as it should have. It stretched, long and twisting, coiling around the edges of the room like fingers reaching for him. He stumbled backward, his hand knocking over the charm he had been gripping. The moment it hit the ground, the air shifted. The fire flared, and in that instant, she was gone. The doorway was empty, but the echo of her presence clung to the air. She had been there. She had been real. That night, Karim did not sleep. He sat in the center of his room, every candle lit, his heart slamming against his ribs as he waited, as he listened. But there was only silence. A silence so thick it felt like it was watching him. By morning, Karim was a ruined man. He staggered into the market, unshaven, his once pristine robes wrinkled and stained. He had not eaten in days, had not slept in longer. People stepped away from him as he passed, crossing themselves, whispering to one another. He went to the chief's hut, fell to his knees, and pleaded. "Help me," he begged. "Something is wrong. Zainab, she has cursed me. She is not gone. She is here." The elders sat in silence, their lined faces unreadable. Then, Chief Umaru, the oldest of them, spoke. "And what would you have us do, Karim? Do you seek protection? Or forgiveness?" Karim's mouth opened, but no words came out. He wanted to demand protection, to have the elders call upon the spirit talkers to drive her away, to force her back into whatever abyss she had risen from. But he knew. He knew no protection would work. He knew the spirits did not act without cause. And he knew, deep in his marrow, that he had earned this. "You tell us that she is here," Umaru continued, his voice slow, deliberate. "And yet, was she not here all along? Was her suffering not seen? Were her cries not ignored?" He leaned forward, his old eyes pinning Karim in place. "Perhaps it is not Zainab who haunts you, but your own deeds. And if that is the case, there is no escape." The silence that followed was crushing. Karim felt it, curling around his throat, pressing against his skin like unseen fingers. That night, when he returned home, he did not lock the door. He did not light the candles. He did not clutch the charms. Instead, he sat in the darkness and waited. Waited for the thing that had been waiting for him. And when the wind howled through the cracks in the walls, carrying her voice with it. "Karim." He did not run. He knew there was nowhere left to go. The darkness in Maulam Karim's home was no longer just an absence of light. It was thick, alive, stretching into every corner like an unseen hand gripping his walls. He had not left his hut in days. The market women no longer whispered about him when they passed. They did not pass at all. Even the elders had stopped sending messengers. He was alone. Or at least, he should have been. But she was still there. Zainab. At first, she only came at night, when the world outside was swallowed by shadow. He would wake to the sound of something breathing in the room, the steady rise and fall of lungs that were not his own. He had covered all his mirrors, but sometimes he would still catch glimpses of her in reflections, her face in the water of his basin, her outline in the polished surface of his dagger. And then, one night, he woke up to find the sheets beside him creased. As if someone had been sleeping there. As if she had returned, not to haunt him, but to take back the space she once occupied. As if she had never left. Karim knew he was unraveling. The feverish whispers of the villagers did not matter anymore. He no longer cared if they called him cursed, if they pointed fingers at his retreating form. Nothing they said could compare to the torment inside his own walls. Because now, she no longer waited for the sun to set. She was with him in the daylight. She sat at the foot of his mat in the mornings, humming the same songs she used to hum while grinding millet. He would feel the presence of her behind him when he ate, hear the shift of fabric when he turned his head too quickly. And though she never spoke more than a whisper, she laughed. A quiet, knowing laugh that sent a chill straight through his bones. One afternoon, as the heat of the sun swelled over Dombora, he finally broke. He staggered to the house of Baba Fololu, the old diviner who lived at the very edge of the village. The people of Dombara feared Fololu, for his eyes saw beyond what ordinary men could bear. Karim had always dismissed him as a fool, a madman who muttered nonsense and collected bones. But now, he had no choice. The old man was waiting for him. "I have seen you in my dreams," Fololu said before Karim even had the chance to speak. "And I have seen her." Karim's breath caught. "Then you know what is happening. You know how to stop it." Baba Fololu sighed, motioning for Karim to sit. "Do you think you are the first man to be haunted by the weight of his own hands?" he asked. "Tell me, Maulam Karim, what is it that truly terrifies you? That she is dead? Or that she never left at all?" Karim clenched his fist. I do not need riddles, old man. I need freedom. Folalu regarded him carefully. And yet, you have always been free, have you not? Free to do as you wished. Free to silence. Free to harm. Free to pretend you did not hear her cries. But now, you are the one who listens. Karim felt rage coil in his gut. He had not come here for philosophy. You are saying there is nothing to be done? That I must live with this thing? Folalu leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. No, Karim. I am saying you must face it. That night, Karim did not light his lanterns. He did not sit cowed in the center of his hut, clutching charms and muttering prayers that no longer reached the ears of any god. He sat in the dark. And he waited. The first thing he noticed was the scent of the earth, deep, musky, grave-like. The air thickened, pressing against his chest, wrapping around his throat. Then came the sound of fabric shifting, the whisper of bare feet against the floor. He did not move. She was here. A breath. Soft. Close. Then a voice. You never listened, Karim. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had spent so many years silencing her, but now he was the one without a voice. Her footsteps moved slowly around him, circling, waiting. You never saw me, she whispered, her voice thick with something deeper than sorrow. You saw only your power. Only your anger. Only the way I bent beneath your hands. But you never saw me. Karim swallowed hard. His hands shook. I see you now, he croaked. Silence. Then, she laughed. A sharp, hollow sound. No, Karim. You fear me now. That is not the same. The room plunged into suffocating cold. The darkness thickened, pressing in from all sides. Karim gasped, his body locking up, his muscles burning with something unseen yet unbearable. He could not move. Then she was in front of him. Close. Too close. You are afraid of the dark now, aren't you? She murmured. But I lived in the dark. I slept in it. I bled in it. I waited in it. And now? She leaned in until her lips were at his ear. Now, it is your turn. The candles burst into flame. The room ignited in a blinding flash of light. And Karim screamed as everything he thought he knew was consumed. Thank you for watching. Did the story remind you of anyone? Please hit the subscribe button, share this story with someone, like the video and tell me about your thoughts in the comment section.